Chapter 15. A Dream of Dreams, 6 months of artificial gravity and silent starlight have passed since the stones of the Krigere heligdom were painted in the blood of the elders. The political fallout has been delicate, requiring a cold, calculating diplomacy I rarely have the patience for. In the weeks following the massacre, I met again, completely alone, with the newly appointed remnants of the High Council and my second-in-command, Togoldor Zaya. Together, we sat in a heavy, tense silence. After a thorough investigation into the subsectors, the evidence was clear. The rogue warriors had acted entirely alone, driven by Erdine's rogue, unhinged ambition. The High Council ultimately chose to extend their grace, forgiving the Krigere sect for the security breach that took their predecessors' lives. Despite the betrayal of his flesh and blood, I did not hold Togoldor accountable for his son's treason. He was a grieving father, a loyal soldier, and a broken man. I kept him close. A wise commander keeps his allies near, but his fractured ones nearer. To guarantee the absolute safety of my legacy, I made the executive decision to keep my warship anchored deep within the cold void of space for the remainder of her pregnancy. I refused to let Ruth's feet touch planetary soil. Every diplomatic summit, every military dispatch, and every decree to the sector leaders was handled strictly via secure, long-range communications. The bridge became my sanctuary, and the stars were my only witnesses. We were safe. My child was safe. I sat before the main terminal on the bridge, the holographic glow of a standard military comms report illuminating the dark metal of my armor. My mind was focused on tactical numbers, but my senses were heightened, tuned to the quiet hum of the ship. Suddenly, the encrypted channel on my gauntlet chimed, overriding the main console. Bartar's voice cut through the static, tight, with a clinical urgency that immediately made my blood run cold. "Lord Van, come to the medical bay, now. It is time." A strange sensation gripped my chest as I stood up from my command chair. As I marched toward the heavy blast doors, a jarring sense of déjà vu washed over me. The dim lighting of the corridors, the steady vibration of the ship's engines beneath my boots, the heavy anticipation thick in the air. It was unfolding, piece by piece, exactly like the dream I had harbored in my mind for months. The dream that was no longer a shadow in my sleep. It was alive, and it was waiting for me just beyond the threshold of the medical doors. When the heavily pressurized doors opened and I stepped into the medical bay, the sterile environment was filled with the sharp, rapid chimes of the monitors. Ruth was laying on her back, her breathing shallow and ragged, her forehead slick with sweat. Bartar stood at the foot of the table, looking beneath the sheet as he meticulously checked her dilation. "Lord Van," the healer said, his voice calm but carried by an undeniable clinical urgency. "She is 9 centimeters dilated. It is time for her to push." I froze at the edge of the room. A rare uncertainty gripped me. I wasn't entirely sure if I should assist Ruth in this intimate process. For the last 6 months, she had remained completely distant from me. Rightfully so. I had kept her a prisoner in the stars, the ghost of the life she once knew still hanging heavily between us. Steeling my resolve, I walked closer to the medical bed, hovering anxiously over Bartar's shoulder. The moment my shadow fell across the bed, Ruth locked her eyes onto mine and let out a piercing, agonizing scream. The sound sliced through me. Assuming her cry was one of pure terror and rejection at the sight of her captor, I immediately turned around to leave the room, wanting to spare her distress. But before I could take a single step toward the door, her strained voice shattered the clinical hum of the monitors. "No!" she yelled, gasping for air. "I wasn't screaming at you. Give me your hand." The command caught me entirely off guard. I turned back around as fast as I could, crossing the floor in a single stride. I reached out and grabbed her small, fragile hands in mine. The instant our fingers locked, she squeezed them with a desperate, terrifying strength, anchoring herself to me. "Now push, Ruth, push!" Batar ordered, his voice commanding the room. Ruth cried out, straining against the agony of the labor, but she never let go. She continued to hold my hand through the grueling cycles of pain. It felt good being there for her, not as a warlord commanding a vessel, but as a protector standing beside the mother of his child. Then it happened. It unfolded exactly like the vision. The moment my son let out his very first sharp cry into the air of the medbay, a profound, overwhelming warmth washed over my entire being. It was a spiritual embrace, a sudden, blinding realization that my bloodline had survived the ashes of our empire. Batar carefully wrapped the newborn and placed my son gently into his mother's waiting arms. As she looked down at the tiny bundle, an immediate look of pure, unadulterated joy washed over Ruth's face. It was as if the pain of the last few hours had suddenly vanished into nothingness. "He is so beautiful. Look at his little pointy ears," she whispered softly, her finger gently tracing the delicate curves of his head. She blinked back, fresh tears, a bright, excited smile breaking across her face as she looked up at me. "He has my complexion," she said while blushing over the child. I smiled at her, my heart hammering fiercely against my ribs. For the first time since the day I ripped her away from her home planet, I didn't see a single trace of hatred hiding behind her eyes. "Ruth, I hate him," I told Batar quietly, my voice barely above a whisper as the gentle hum of the room's ventilation swallowed up the sound. The old healer stopped what he was doing, carefully placing his electronic datapad back onto the side table. He turned to look at me, the usual knowing smirk gracing his weathered face as he gave a slow, understanding nod. "I know you do," he said, agreeingly, his tone devoid of any judgment. He pulled up a stool, his eyes softening with genuine empathy. "The pain that he has caused you is entirely real, Ruth. Just because he has shown restraint and hasn't forced himself upon you since the beginning of your pregnancy, it does not mean he suddenly deserves your forgiveness." I didn't acknowledge his statement. Instead, I looked down at the tiny baby wrapped securely in my arms. My little boy. He was so incredibly adorable, completely oblivious to the complex web of hatred and politics he had been born into. I traced his perfect little nose with the tip of my finger, causing his fingers to twitch in his sleep. A heavy wave of grief washed over me, a familiar ache tightening in my chest. I wished my mother was here with me. I wished more than anything that she could be in this room, holding my hand and greeting her beautiful grandson. "I know that Van would die protecting me and the baby," I said somberly, my eyes never leaving my son's face. "But Keen, it is just that so much has been taken from me in these past 6 months." Batar moved closer to my bedside, his white jacket rustling softly as he sat down on the edge of the mattress. Sensing the heavy direction of my thoughts, he gently steered the conversation away from the shadows of my past. "Have you decided on a name for him?" he asked softly. I looked up at Batar with a look of uncertainty. I wasn't sure if it was even my choice to make. I assumed Van would just dictate whatever he wanted him to be called. Bartas saw the look of confusion on my face and let out a soft, reassuring chuckle. "No, Ruth," he said, with one of his welcoming smiles. "Here in Clison, tradition is absolute. It is always the mother who names the children, regardless of rank or house, and since Van is the warlord of a great, powerful sect, there will be a grand naming ceremony held in the coming days to officially present your son to our people." It had not occurred to me that my innocent little baby would be subjected to a public ceremony just to honor his birth. The thought sent a nervous flutter through my stomach, but looking down at his sweet face, I felt a sudden surge of protective pride. "I do have a name," I told him, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Batar's smile widened, but he didn't press me to reveal it just yet. He rose from the edge of the bed, turning his back to me as he began to methodically bag up his medical equipment and organize his tools. As I watched him move, a sudden, burning realization gripped my mind. I was holding the future heir to an entire civilization, yet I knew absolutely nothing about Clison, its culture, or the world my son was destined to inherit. "Bartar," I called out, causing him to pause. "How did the Krigere sect start? Was your society always structured like this? Like an empire of warriors?" "No," he said casually, not looking up from his bag. He zipped the compartment closed with a sharp click. It was much worse. He slung the strap over his shoulder and turned toward the threshold, offering a dismissive wave of his hand. "But you do not want to hear the rambling stories of an old man, Ruth. You need your rest." He began to walk toward the sliding automated doors. "But I do," I insisted, my voice ringing out clearly across the quiet room. "I really do, Bartar. Please," I begged. "Are you entirely sure, Ruth?" he asked, a faint, warning smile playing on his lips. "It is a long, bloody story." "I'm sure," I pleaded, shifting my weight against the pillows. He paused, adjusting his white uniform, leaning his back against the bulkhead wall, his eyes growing distant as he drifted back through the centuries. 1,000 years ago, us Krigere came to this planet," he began, as his voice dropped into a low, resonant rhythm. "The exact history of our journey through the stars is lost to time, but we all know we came from the same cradle. Our physical features, our builds, our strength, the sharp crest of our ears let us know this, even if the written records do not." "But you are all different colors," I interrupted, a puzzling thought striking me as I remembered the fierce apricot color of the warriors of Van's squad compared to the beautiful brown skin of the slaughtered High Council members. He looked at me and smiled warmly, with gentle patience in his eyes. "No, Ruth, we are all simply shades of one color. We are one people, born of the same dust." Fascinated, I sat up a little straighter in the bed, carefully shifting my sleeping baby boy and laying him gently upon the soft, thick fur covering beside me. "Then why were the brown-skinned elders the ones sitting on the High Council? Why are they the leaders?" I asked. Bartar stopped, crossing his arms over his chest as a knowing smirk returned to his face. "I am getting to that, if you would let an old man speak." I offered a small, apologetic shrug, gesturing for him to continue. "So, as I was saying," he said, while letting out a slight chuckle, "we arrived on this almost dead planet a millennium ago, and for 500 years, our ancestors fought like wild beasts over the miserable scraps left behind. There was no law, No warrior oaths, no empire. Everyone was trying to find what little fresh water they could. It was an endless, exhausting cycle of survival. Our ancestors are the ones who eventually established the basic structures of the sects, though we are not entirely sure how or why they were divided in those brutally early days. Today, we simply know who originated from where because of the strict preservation of the bloodlines, because of the sacred names we carry. Batar's smile faded, replaced by a grim, reverent solemnity. He stepped away from the wall, walked back over to my bedside, and sat down on the edge of the frame. But it was Slaget om Clippene, the Battle of the Rocks, that changed all of this, he said softly. Before that day, it was utter chaos, man against man, farmer against miner, brother against brother. That was the war that forged the world your son was just born into. The war was a profoundly bloody one, Ruth. Even women and children were mercilessly slaughtered. My people, the Dolgun, are fierce, and we fought bravely in that war. We are naturally much smaller than the average Krigere warrior, so we had to train in entirely different combat styles. We learned to be faster, more agile, aiming always to strike a deadly blow within 2 or 3 hits. Listening to Batar explain his lineage suddenly made everything click in my mind. It instantly reminded me of the bloody ambush at the temple when the High Council members were murdered. Batar had done exactly what he was describing. He had bypassed their massive shields, moving like liquid to strike a definitive, deadly blow within 2 or 3 hits. Batar continued, his voice low. It was the Dolgun who has always lived by a warrior's oath. It is what my people fundamentally believe in. Once we captured an opposing Krigere camp, we would execute the active warriors, but we left the women and children completely alone. We left them with enough water and food to survive. But this grace, this mercy, was never given to my people in return, nor was it given to the Ufadili wa Masomo. The Ufadili wa Masomo, I repeated, trying to pass the unfamiliar words. That is the name for the people who established the High Council, Batar explained. The Ufadili wa Masomo are scholars. Historically, they focused their intellect on understanding Clison, mapping its geology, and finding ways to survive off the harsh resources available here. But do not get me wrong. Just like any other sect on this planet, they have their own teeth. They have their own elite group of warriors known as the Shuja. The Shuja are highly skilled, lethal combatants. They are just incredibly low in numbers. He leaned in slightly, his eyes sharp. During the Great War, it wasn't a warlord who ended the conflict. It was a simple farmer named Laxton Disjin Lao Moon. He managed to kill Nergi Erdeen, the supreme commander. Van's direct ancestor, Maral Shalu Sint, was the second in command to Nergi at the time. To this very day, Van's bloodline firmly believes that Lao Moon was a coward and that he wasn't the true, honorable winner of that battle. Wait, I said, a sudden realization interrupting his flow. My heart skipped a beat as I looked down at the tiny baby resting on the furs. So, my son's surname is Shalu Sint? Batar shifted on the bed, laying down completely on his left side and propping his head up with his hand. He looked at me with a mischievous wink. Yes, so make sure you choose a fitting name to go before it. He took a deep breath before continuing his tale. With the unexpected death of Nergi, the shock of its impact on the sects temporarily united all the warring Krigere. They decided that we, as a collective people, could no longer endure the bloodshed. They called a grand meeting to establish a permanent truce between themselves, the Dolgun, and the Ufadili Wamasomo. At that summit, each sect established their permanent territories. The Ufadili Wamasomo were given the last choice, and they decided on a vast tract of land that seemed entirely barren and dry to the naked eye. But those scholars knew exactly what they were doing. They chose the only region on the planet that had direct, unhindered access to the massive reservoirs of water hidden deep within the ground. That is why they hold the seats of the High Council. "And your people?" I asked. "My people, the Dolgun, settled far into the north," Bata said softly. "We chose to turn away from conquest and became healers instead. This is why I am in the position I am in today." The Krigere remained the dominant warriors of Clison, but as a condition of the peace, they formally adopted the strict warrior oath of my people. This historical truce is probably why modern warlords allow us to serve as both the primary healers and the personal guards for the things they hold most dear. He looked down at my baby boy, his eyes full of deep, protective reverence. "Their families, the keepers of their bloodline." Bata added, "Why is it so important that they have children?" I asked curiously, watching him closely. "If a warlord dies without any heirs, couldn't their second-in-command simply take over the sect?" "Yes, they can," Bata said while shifting his weight. But this wasn't the case for the Shalu Sint. The Great Truce changed absolutely everything. Once the Lao Moons defeated Nergi, their bloodline legally became the supreme warlords of the planet, and the Shalu Sints, well, let's just say this sudden change of fortune did not work in their favor. Van's clan instantly lost the status, luxury, and authority that they had become accustomed to over the centuries. He let out a low sigh, his eyes tracking the shadows on the ceiling. They were angry, Ruth, deeply angry and fiercely jealous of the immense power the Lao Moons gained. With the Krigere unified under one banner, the empire had become entirely unstoppable until Van Shalu Sint and Togoldor Zaya joined forces. They initiated a brutal coup, combining their military might to completely overturn and slaughter the Lao Moons. Bata stood up from the edge of my bed, dusting off his white uniform and picking up his medical bag once more. "I will tell you the rest of our history at another time," Bata said kindly, offering a gentle, parting nod. "Now it is truly time for you to get some rest." He turned and walked toward the threshold. I watched his retreating figure until the automated door hissed shut behind him, plunging the room back into a quiet, heavy stillness. I looked down at my sleeping son, a cold dread settling deep in my stomach. Hearing the blood-soaked truth of how Van had seized his throne made me realize a terrifying reality. This alien world that I was now hopelessly trapped in was far more dangerous than the warlord who had captured me.